before starting actual customization, we also must understand how Spring internally works and what are the default behaviors that it provides and how it is providing that, so that we can pinpoint which point we want to customize that and what are the default ones that are given here. So the purpose of this video to understand the very high level how Spring security internally works. So let's get started. So the next diagram that I'm going to show you, it's a UML of the classes and interfaces that are provided by the Spring security internally. So there are some interfaces and classes. The relationship, when you represent that in the UML, so there are different kinds of relationship. We have aggregation, inheritance, hash, and generalization, realization. If you see the UML representation of those one, there are different kind of arrows. Arrow representation varies when you are going to represent the relationship, but that complicates the things, right? So if I want to explain that, so that is why, and I have not used those specific arrows to understand that. I have used a single arrow to represent the relationship. I have put the labels there, like this one. You see this one, right? So I highly suggest you follow along what I am saying and which point I am pointing here, so that would be of great help. So do not take it as a class diagram or the actual in a UML, unified modeling language syntax. Do not take that, please. Okay, so that's a word of caution that I want to give. So let's get started to understand how it works. So the first, this is the client means can be our browser who is giving us uh, credentials, username and password, and trying to access the endpoints that we have in our system. And in our case, it is find by mail the user details. Okay, so the first interaction that happens, it is a authentication filter. Authentication filter itself is provided by the Spring security. So filters are a general term. We already have seen this filter custom implementation. If I show you that, see, in one of the previous videos where I was explaining how to log the request and response in the product microservice, I have created a custom filter and put the logic here. So when before actually hitting the R endpoints, the request goes through these filters as per the configuration. Okay, and before passing the response to the client, it goes through the same filter. So if we want to play around with the request and response, we can do in the filters itself. Okay, if I want to just show the code, so this is the code of the product microservice, this is the filters, and you see this request response filter is here. And the main thing is that all the filters has to implement this filter, and it has this do filter implementation that it has to do. And any filter, any kind of filter that is there, all the filters has to implement this filter and configure that, and all the things are taken care by the Spring itself. Okay, so that's the whole idea about filters that are there. So authentication filter is one filter that is provided by Spring security. When we add a Spring security dependency in our application, it got added automatically. And when any call to the endpoints are happening, those requests goes through this authentication filter. And now when it has authentication filter, it has a specific task to do. So it has lengthy things like what it can do. Actually, authentication, it is going to check whether the whether the user that you are passing through, it has access to the system, access to the endpoint or not. If it has access to that one, it can directly take you to the endpoint directly. Okay, so and those authentication information are stored here to check whether it is authenticated or not. And security context is another interface that has a specific method which holds the authentication information. And this is the authentication object, that is the information about the user. It's a authenticity, whether it is whether he or she is allowed to access the endpoint or not. And security context, where it is holding that information, this authentication information. So these are the two high level, two basic things that are in the authentication filter. But apart from these, there are a number of methods and attributes that we are going to see in subsequent videos. But for now, understand authentication information are stored in the authentication filter. So when our request has come here, authentication filter, it is going to check whether it has access to or not. Based on that, we have authentication managers in the authentication filter, which authentication manager, as the name suggests itself, it is an interface. So it has a specific method that all authentication managers, the implementations that are there, has to implement that. And in that authentication manager, it is going to call the specific actual authentication mechanism. So for example, we are looking into this one like username and password authentication. So for username and password authentication, there is a specific provider. So and provider also are taken care by the interface. And the best thing about the interfaces is that they have provided you the agreement contract through the through the interfaces. And if we want to customize that, we can just implement that authentication provider, and whatever methods that are there, we can put our own custom logic. So that is the best thing that is provided by the interfaces and the contracts that are there. So one default behavior is already there. If you want to go with that, go with that. That is one option. But most of the time when we are creating our own application, we have our own mechanism to authenticate the user. So for that, interfaces help us a lot. So that is what we can do. So authentication manager. So for example, if I talk about where authentication manager can help us. So for example, we have one mechanism to authenticate the user, like we have username, user password is the one mechanism that I want to authenticate. Another one can be the biometric, right? Biometric means face recognition, fingerprint authentication that are there. Another can be OTP authentication, and many more that you can think about that you want to put in place to authenticate the user. So these different authentication mechanism, we can consider that they are authentication providers, specific authentication provider. They have to get themselves registered with the authentication manager, and when authentication filter is calling this authentication manager, it has to resolve into one of the authentication provider which it can follow along. So for example, here I have shown you one of the implementation that is provided by the Spring itself. That is when we have JDBC authentication, like we want to do the authentication with the database with the username password, or DAO authentication provider is the default implementation that we can use. And under that DAO authentication provider, we have two things. First is the user detail service. Second is the password encoder. So user detail service, as the name suggests, name itself explains, user details. It is going to contain the details of the user, like username, password, its account is logged or not, and other related information like password is expired or not. So all the basic information which we want to utilize in authenticating the user. And the second thing about the password encoder. Previous videos I have explained you how to hash the password before storing that in the system. And Spring security itself suggests highly that we should not do that in the clear text password. So that is why password encoders are there. And I also told you in the previous videos that we do not have to lots of things our own. There are password encoders specific to the secure hashing algorithm, that we have bcrypt encoder, we have ascrypt encoder, we have argon 2 encoder that we can directly use. And the password encoder has a method like encode and matches, where we have to call the actual implementation of the specific algorithm, and which are provided by the Spring security itself, and they are already provided until unless we want to do our own. Okay, so mostly with these things like encoder and matching, we go with the default implementation that is given by the Spring security itself. That is what we do not do much we cannot do much customization into that one, but that's up to us and up to the requirement that we have in our application, right? So I hope you got the idea about this DAO authentication provider, and based on this we can think about that which point we want to customize. So at this line, we can say that I want to write our own provider. I can implement this authentication provider. It has a specific method that authenticate, and I have to implement that authentication, and I can directly call the custom repository. We have our own tables, our own username and password. We can put our own custom logic there. So this is the one point that we can customize the security implementation. Another one is that I want to use the DAO authentication provider. Let it filter chain, let it call this DAO authentication provider. But I want to customize this user detail service. I want to customize this password encoder. So these are the second point of customization that we can do. So wherever there are the interfaces, we can put our own implementation. Authentication manager is there, we can put our own. So if we want to customize the authentication provider and get it registered with the authentication manager default implementation can take care of calling the custom one that we are providing. But if we want to put our own custom logic to resolve the different authentication provider, we can do that as well. So this is the yet another point of customization that we can do. Okay, so now I hope you got the idea how the request is traveling and how it is happening inside the Spring security. So as a client, we pass the username, password, we try to access the specific endpoint. It goes through a set of filters, authentication filter, then manage. Inside filter, we have authentication manager, authentication provider, and all those stuffs. And authentication filter is not the one filter that is there. There are different filters in the Spring security. So let me take you the code and show you some of these that are there, just the high level. Okay, so let's go to the IDE. So the UML that you are seeing here, auth.pml, that is already provided here. I'm going to push in the GitHub. You can get this one directly in the code itself, and you can customize as your need. So if you want to change this diagram, okay. So first, let's see authentication filter. Okay, so this is the one. Okay, so and here it is extending the once per request filter, and internally it is extends generic filter. So there are different different chaining that is there, but finally it is implementing the filters, right? And others are there as per the requirement, because security, I told you, is a very complex mechanism, and it has been taken care. So I'm trying to simplify this so that we can understand what we need and what things we want to customize here. So here, if you see, we have we should have one method that is do filter internal. That is the one here, right? So if you see request matcher, if it matches request, and all the methods are here, right? Authentication result or attempt authentication is there. So you see what I'm going to show you. Yeah, this authentication I was talking about. If you see here, it has extends principal, it has get credential, get details, get principal. These are the methods specific to the user that is trying to get it authenticated with the system. Okay, so that is what authentication is. And next one, I was talking about the context, security context. So where is that? So if you see the attempt authentication here, authentication manager, you can see here, it is coming here. So if you go to this class and try to see the line by line, it is going to take you to all the mechanism that it is doing, right? So successful authentication, I think it should be there. Yeah, you see here is when it is authenticated successfully, it is going to create the empty context, and it is going to set the authentication for us. And going forward, when any new request, any further requests are coming, it is going to take the details from the security context itself and trying to see that if it is validated or not. If it is validated, it is not going to call the filter chain. It is going to directly return from there itself, because it is already authenticated, right? So that is what it is. So we saw the high level authentication manager, and authentication also. Let me show you the DAO authentication provider that is there. So DAO authentication provider is here, right? So it implements the authentication provider. Actually, authentication provider is the main thing that I want to show. If you see, authentication provider has two methods, authenticate and supports. Authenticate is something which has actual logic of authenticating the user. And support is something which authentication manager is going to take help from here. We can write our own logic whether particular authentication provider supports here or not, as the name suggests here itself. Okay, so if I want to show you the how many implementation of authentication provider here, you see the I button here, just click here. You will see the n number of implementation itself given by the Spring Security itself, right? You see all of these are coming from the Spring Security package, right? So we have abstract, anonymous, DAO authentication, JAS authentication provider, JAS authentication provider, right? So there are n number of like testing authentication provider. So as per the need, we need whatever we need here, right? So we have n number of providing the authentication to the system. We have OAuth also. So some of these we are going to see in the subsequent videos, and accordingly other things you can itself explore, that you can see how to navigate here. Like if I want to go to the DAO authentication provider, this is here. Okay, so and authenticate method here, retrieve user, that you can see it is going get user detail service, load user by name. So if you see the user detail service that I was explaining, it has one method, load user by name. We can implement this user detail service and customize this load user by name method here, and it can do the other tasks for me as per the implementation that we provide. User details is another thing which is as I already have shown you, that get username, get password, account non-expired, account non-logged, credential non-expired, it is enabled yet or not. So we can implement these things and can have our own custom mechanisms here. So the contract is provided by the Spring itself, Spring Security team itself. We just have to put the implementation, and before putting the implementation, we have to understand how do they work. That is what we are doing in this video. Okay, so we got this one. So we got the idea about the authentication providers. If I show you the authenticate method here, so that authenticate method is not here actually. Additional authentication is here, but actual authentication is here. Yeah, because it is extending another abstract authentication. Further it is implementing, so it has one that it should have that authenticate provider. Yeah, this authentication is here, right? So you see it is determining the username here. It is trying to take that from the cache if it is there. It is going to use that. Otherwise it is going to do all of these things, retrieve the username not found exception. Logically what we can think about the set of steps it is doing for us. So I suggest you go through it and see line by line what it is doing. Okay, so the next thing I want to explain, that authentication filter I was telling, right? So there are n number of filters that are in place here. So how we can know about those filters? So if we are going to start our application, so there is one thing that I want to show here. How we can print that one? Is there any way that we can do? So yes, we can do that. So we have this application here. So there is one annotation, and enable web security is that one that is going to do the customization for us. Debug, by default it is false. It is not recommended to the production application at all. So if I want to put it debug and start the application, let's see what it is doing. So actually it is going to put all the security related information that we put log.info, log.debug. So whatever log.debug information is there, we can get that information from here. And the debug information actually contains the sensitive information. It is not suggested to do in the production application, highly not recommended. So but for the understanding or for the dev environment, we can put it and understand how the request is flowing throughout the system. So let's wait for the application to start. Connectivity is doing won't. Yeah, you see earlier when we started our application without this annotation and without this configuration, we are not seeing this information. So you see this warning here, security debugging is enabled. This may include sensitive information, do not use in production system. But for the understanding part, we can use it, right? So just clean this out and try to access a specific endpoint here. So we had this endpoint, right? So just put it here and just come to the logger here. Okay, so you see lots of informations are here. Spring security debugger, right? So request received. Earlier we were not seeing this one, right? So user find email, it is giving us request facade, it is giving us servlet path. User find is here, path info, host, what it is giving here. So all the request informations that are there. So you might be thinking that from where this is coming. So if you go here and inspect it, so see the network call. Actually I am going to show you. So if you refresh this one, not refresh this one, let me show you that right away. Just clear it and try to, yeah, you see this call. I was trying to show you this call here. So if you see this find call 302 means it has been redirected to some other call. You see this J session ID is here. So all these things that you are seeing here, servlet path user find is here, that you are seeing here. User find is the servlet path here. So get is the method that we have. Actual call is here. So localhost connection sec, these all these informations that we have, it is coming from here. Request header, so this is the response header. If you see the request header, these are the information that are given by the our client, our browser itself here. You see all these information are being logged here, and this is the J session ID that is being given here. So if you see, go and see the application here and CU cookie, this is the J session ID 5AA, the same information is coming here, right? And the next, this is the information about the clients that are being logged here, and these are the highly sensitive information, right? So security filter chain, this is what I was trying to show you. So these are the filters that it is going through and trying to go through all these filters and trying to authenticate the user as per the information that it provides. So web sync manager, header writer, CSRF, logout, username password authentication filter, default login page generating. So these are all the filter chain, part of the filter chain. As per the configuration, they are going to be called. So in the subsequent videos, I'm going to put a debug point at some of these filters and going to explain you how what is written under that one and how they are working. But now you know that how to get the, but now you know that how to print this filter, how to get these informations right here, and it can do the job for us, right? So that is, I think that is a lot that I have explained you about the Spring security. So the next video, I am going to show you the first level of customization that I want to do at this point, authentication provider. This I'm going to implement this authentication provider, and based on the user detail that we have in our system under user table, right? We have our own password hashing mechanism and we have our own password service. Going to put that into play and going to see how it works. So if you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe the video and share it with your friends, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section, what you think about the video. Any kind of feedback is very welcome here. I'll see you in the next video with the authentication provider customization. So take care. Bye bye.